Hey guys, it's Candace.
And it's Elena.
And you're listening to Cousins on Crime. Hello, Lena.
Hooty hoo.
You don't look cold today. You're wearing a tank top.
My heat is on in my house.
Ah.
And so my closet is nice and warm. I might get cold here in a minute.
Toasty.
You know, the hormones might,
Yeah.
I get a flash. I start to sweat, whatever.
I'm right there with you, girl. Right there with you. You're having icy weather there in Texas right now, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah, today it's a little slushy, but we've had more rain and freezing temps tonight, so I'm sure the roads will be icy again in the morning, but yeah.
Yeah. The case I have for you today is a wild one. Wild. I feel like we say that every week, but this case was actually suggested to me by my Uncle Ian in England. So
Oh, cool.
Daniel's Uncle Ian. Yeah. His
Hello,
mother's
Uncle
brother.
Ian.
Yes. Hello, mate. He's going to really cringe. So let's get started. Richard John Bingham was born in London on December 18th, 1934. He grew up rather privileged and was the oldest son of the 6th Earl of Lucan. Doesn't that sound fancy?
It does.
When he was 6, he moved to Wales, then America. This was during World War II, so he was separated from his parents for a little bit. For about 5 years, he was raised by like nannies and servants, and then he ended up returning to Eton in the UK. After completing his national service in 1955, he briefly worked for a banker, making about £500 a year, which doesn't sound like much. But then he began gambling, like professionally.
Yeah.
His first big win was £26,000 playing a card game called Chemin de Fer.
Well, that's better than the 500 pounds.
Right. So this was like, he was like, I can make £26,000 in one pop just by playing cards.
And he was hooked.
Exactly. And gambling wasn't actually legalized until 1964. So when it was finally legalized, he really went for it. And he spread his peacock feathers at that point. His friends started calling him Lucky because he was really good at gambling. So one of John's best friends, William Shandkid, I believe it's pronounced, introduced John to his sister-in-law, Veronica Duncan. She was a beautiful socialite, blonde, petite, and he fell in love. Well, he married Veronica on November 28th, 1963, at Holy Trinity Church in London, England. She first moved in with him in his flat that he had been, like his bachelor flat, in the summer of the following year, but they bought this beautiful home on a very prestigious block in Eaton Square. This was a 5-story Victorian terrace home. It was gorgeous.
Oh, I bet
46
that was beautiful.
Lower Belgrave Street. Oh yeah, I'll post pictures of it. Like a dream. It was a very exclusive address, and to this day that block of homes actually remains one of the most expensive places to live in Britain.
Oh, wow.
So just so you know what these people were working with.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't go into this in this episode, but perhaps another time. This block of homes was has a very scandalous history.
Oh.
Like murders, including this one, gangsters' affairs, like children as a result of those affairs. And before all of that, the land that Eaton Square was built on had a very dark past. So really interesting stuff. Maybe there's a curse on this block.
Kind of reminds me of Peaky Blinders. Have you seen that show?
I have tried to watch that probably twice, and I just can't get into it. I want to be into it.
Yeah, I really enjoy the show.
Do you
Yeah,
watch it?
yeah, I like it.
Okay.
But yeah, that
Well,
kind of gives me
I'll
that
try
kind
and
of.
get back involved.
It's a lot going on, and listening to the accent and getting into everything going on. It's a lot, but yeah, I really enjoy it.
Okay, well, I'm going to give it another whirl. So the happy couple were living the high life, envied by many. There was money, prestige in society. Now, John's father died shortly after he and Veronica got married, so he succeeded to earldom. Earldom.
Okay.
Becoming Richard John Bingham, 6th Earl of Lucan, and his wife became a countess. So now they're really living that life.
Yeah.
Now they've got titles. October 24th, 1964, they welcomed a daughter named Frances, and she got the title of Lady. Isn't that so cute? Little Lady Frances. They also had a son 3 years later named George, and he became a lord and heir to Lord Lucan. Lucan was I'll refer to John going forward as Lucan.
Okay.
Lord Lucan or Lucan. He was a perpetual gambler, and we talked about that. Mainly he played backgammon, but also he did poker and blackjack, and those were some of his favorites. He got a little too big for his britches, though, when it came to being a lord, He'd been a gambler when he met his wife, Veronica, but when he succeeded to earldom, he really started treating her very poorly. He thought much of himself. He would verbally abuse her. He would humiliate her in front of people, like just talk to her terribly in front of anyone.
Aww.
She said she thinks she had postpartum depression, and he painted her out to be like nutso. He would speak with her doctors and try to have her admitted into nursing homes. Like nursing homes? I'm not sure. Maybe in that day or in the UK, it's a little different than here, but the source material said nursing homes. But she refused. She was like, y'all need to chill. I'm depressed. I'm not psychotic, I just need some support. So he took her home after he attempted to get her admitted into this nursing home. He took her home, and he had a doctor come around to give her an injection. And the drug was called Modatin. She had terrible side effects from, and she actually had to take more medications to combat the side effects. And Modatin is an antipsychotic.
Okay.
And it's used in patients primarily with schizophrenia. So that's not going to work for depression.
And the fact that this doctor was willing to do this, I guess if he gets paid well enough.
And two, I think if you have a lord telling you that his wife is acting erratically and suffering and who knows? Mental health really was not, I'm not sure about in the UK, but of course in the US, we were still calling PTSD hysteria in the 80s.
True, yeah.
So I think mental health just really wasn't understood then, and maybe her behavior, people really didn't know how to help her other than to just tranquilize her is really all I think of. Somehow she was able to switch doctors, though, from the local GP that gave her that dose, and she went under the care of a guy named Dr. Hay, her new doctor, and she became pregnant with her third child under his care. Lady Camilla was born June 30th, 1970. And it was a really difficult pregnancy for her and labor, actually, physically. And, it was just compounded by the fact that her husband was not happy about having a third child. She didn't have support with the depression. I'm not sure if she was on medication throughout her pregnancy, but a lot of women don't take, the depression medication, so they really suffer. And of course, if your husband doesn't support you in life, let alone he's not happy about having a third child, Chris Watts.
Oh, yeah.
So Lucan's behavior towards her grew worse after she had Camilla. He was talking to people around town, telling them to keep an eye on her, like watch her behavior with the kids and report back. And then the physical abuse began. Now, according to Veronica in her sworn statement to police, he had broken off the end of a cane and covered the end in plaster. And he kept it in this like bedside table, and she found it. And when she opened the little bedside cabinet and found it, he was standing right behind her.
Oh my
like
gosh.
Just watching her find it. And he instructed her to take off all her clothes.
Oh gosh.
And bend over. So he proceeded to beat her with that cane. He made her do really rigorous workouts in a rubber hot suit. Like,
why?
These are the types of things that she alleges that he did to her during their marriage.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and during all this time too, she's still bouncing around doctor to doctor, trying to find someone to listen to her.
Right.
Funny that thing kind of still happens to women today.
It does.
Boop. Yeah. And Lucan did end up succeeding in having her admitted to a nursing home finally.
Oh my gosh.
At one point, but she walked home. she was like, I don't like it.
Okay, bye.
I'm just gonna... I don't know that she like escaped. I don't think she was there involuntarily, so she just walked home. And she recounted that it was like really far from her house, so she just was like walking endlessly, but she made it back home. And the last straw, though, for Veronica was when Lord Lucan contacted her doctor at the time and insinuated that she may not be fit to care for their children. She was like, all right, you can call me crazy, you can say whatever you want about me, but you're not gonna say I can't take care of my kids.
Exactly.
And so she was like, that's enough. Enough of that. And that was a step too far for her. So according to Lady Lucan, Lord Lucan got really mad when her doctor informed him that she was perfectly capable of looking after her kids. She wasn't like any risk to them or...
Right.
So she said he moved out after that. And that was the end of their marriage, but the beginning of a very nasty custody battle.
Of course.
So his efforts to paint her as an unstable mother failed in the end because she was awarded custody. And Lucan was only allowed to see the children on weekends and half of school holidays. But he wasn't letting it go. This guy was, I didn't spend much time talking about like his history because he's not our victim here, but it's important to know who we're dealing with here. And he was arrogant, a narcissist, and he was not going to let this just happen. He was not going to lose. He recorded phone conversations between he and his wife. He hired a private detective to go spy on her. He even spied on her. I mean, he would sit outside their house and try and get any kind of information, see her doing anything damning that he could use in court to fight against her. So Lady Lucan found herself going through this custody battle. She was a single mom, caring for 3 children, and it was very difficult for her. She was still suffering from depression. So in September of 1974, she employed a nanny named Sandra Rivet. Sandra was born in September 1945 in the UK, but her family actually relocated to Australia when she was 2. But when she was 8, she moved back to the UK to a place called Croydon in South London. Her friends and family described her as really intelligent, but more like street smart than book smart. Which I consider myself to be more street smart than book smart. In young adulthood, she worked as an apprentice to a hairdresser, then a secretary. And around that time, she had a really monumental breakup that landed her voluntarily in a mental health facility where she was treated for depression. But she got better and she found love again. Actually, she found love a couple times again.
Oh.
She had a son with a man that she was engaged to, and when that fell apart, she actually considered giving her son up for adoption. By this time, she was working as a nanny for a doctor, and she felt like she couldn't care for her son and, have this career. So her parents ended up with full custody of her son to help her out, and she was just getting herself together, getting stuff figured out. And again, it didn't take her long to bounce back. This is what I mean by street smart. She seemed to have like this really short recovery time when things went wrong.
She would just figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. She married a man named Roger Rivet in 1967, and they were great for a while, but, we talk about this often, that 7-year itch struck, and they got a divorce. After her divorce, she was now 29 years old, and she took the job as Lady Lucan's nanny. She moved into the family home with her and her children. So on the night of Thursday, November 7th, 1974, Sandra Rivet, the family's nanny, had just put the 2 youngest children to sleep upstairs. I mentioned she lived with them. She actually lived up on the top floor near the children's bedrooms, so she could kind of be right there. And Sandra typically had Thursdays off. She would usually spend Thursdays with her new boyfriend, but she had stayed home that night. She was switching her nights off. I'm not sure why, but that was kind of in the works. So she decided, I'll stay home, help with the kids anyway, because I'm here. And so she was tidying up, collecting empty teacups and things upstairs to take down to the kitchen. And she popped into Veronica's room and asked her if she'd like a cup of tea. And Lady Lucan usually had a cuppa at that time of evening, but it was such a lovely offer for Sandra to go get it for her. So Veronica said, yes, please. And she waited while Sandra went downstairs. Veronica was watching TV in her bedroom with her oldest daughter, Frances, and before long, she realized Sandra's been gone a while. Long enough where she was like, I need to go check on her, because she didn't hear her or anything like that. And it was a huge house, so
Okay.
she went downstairs, and she was surprised to not see any lights on in the kitchen, as you would expect if someone was making a cup of tea.
Right.
Or just downstairs in general, you would need a light on because it was nighttime. So she walked over to the top of the basement stairs and kind of called down, Sandra, are you there? And just as she called down, she heard something behind her, on the ground floor. And she turned around, and immediately she was hit in the head.
Oh my gosh.
With some really hard object, and she fell to the floor. She said she knew when the man shoved his fingers down her throat and said, shut up, that it was her husband, Lord Lucan.
Lord.
He had his hands around her throat, and they struggled for a while. He was trying to choke her, and she grabbed his genitals to try and get him off of her.
Yeah, girl.
That'll do it. She said that he said something to her like, there's no room for the 2 of us. And when she asked him where Sandra was, he said she's gone.
Oh, no.
So he told her that when she came downstairs in the darkness, he thought that Sandra was Veronica, and he killed her. So Veronica was terrified, and she was like, well, where is she?
Yeah.
And I think Veronica kind of snapped into some sort of survival mode, because she was like, look, we can talk about this. So she said she kind of grabbed his chest and because he was on top of her, trying to strangle her. And so she was using that proximity, I guess you could say, to entice him to calm down. She just wanted him to calm down. So she said, let's go upstairs. We can wash up. And she was bleeding profusely. He had hit her not just once in the head. She didn't realize how many times he had hit her in the head, because I guess she may have blacked out from the first blow. So he ended up going upstairs with her, and he went into the bathroom to get some towels, for her head, because she was bleeding.
Here, let me wrap this around you.
Right? And I think that her survival mode, like that really worked because something in him stopped what he was doing, and he probably thought, my kids are home, this is my wife,
Wow.
and just something kind of human in him came out maybe for a minute. So he went into the bathroom, like I said, he got some towels, he was washing his hands off, and she saw her chance. She ran down the stairs and out of the house and into a nearby pub called the Plumber's Arms.
Oh my gosh.
Having seen this frantic woman bleeding from the head, covered in her own blood, someone immediately phoned an ambulance and she was rushed to the hospital.
Wow.
There at the hospital, she spoke with detectives who took her statement, and she was very brave. And she was really trying to remember everything in detail that she had just experienced. I mean, she'd just nearly been killed.
Right.
So she couldn't remember exactly what he was wearing, but she believed he had on dark trousers and a light colored sweater. And he was wearing gloves because he stuck his fingers in her mouth, and he was wearing gloves. When the police responded to the scene, they found no forced entry. So immediately they were kind of believing her story, like he had a key, he had a way to get in. And as they approached the door of the basement stairs, the door was on the ground floor going down to the basement, the carpet there was saturated with blood. There was blood spatter on the walls, the ceiling, and on the base of the door. And there was also notable blood smears on the walls, like someone was being drugged down the steps. Down the basement stairs they went, looking for Sandra. Blood was pooled at the bottom of the stairs. Blood spatter was on the side of a piano that was nearby. And laying there on the floor was a canvas United States mail bag, which contained the body of Sandra Rivet.
He put her in a
Like
bag?
a big canvas mail bag. Yeah. United States mail bag, I thought was interesting. It appeared that Lucan ran upstairs to clean up. And when I say upstairs, he ran up from the basement to the ground floor. This was like 5 stories, so he ran from the basement to the ground floor. He went in the cloakroom, which was like a little washroom, and the police found blood and hair in the basin in the cloakroom. Police found a piece of bloody lead pipe wrapped in tape near the cloakroom, and that evidence suggested Veronica's account was true. I mean, what does that lead pipe wrapped in tape sound like to you? Do you remember the cane he broke off that had a plaster wrapped around the end of it?
Right.
So this seems like something he does. She said she'd gone to the stairs that led down to the basement to holler down to Sandra. Then she heard something behind her. So again, this evidence is kind of corroborating her account. Additionally, there was a light bulb found on a chair down in the basement. It had been removed from the ceiling. So when Sandra went down there, or when she was about to go down there to flip on the light, no light came on.
Right.
So total darkness, and he didn't know who he was attacking.
Gosh.
So the police found the children in their bedrooms unharmed, thankfully. I'm not sure if they had woken up in all the commotion or if they were still asleep. But Madeline Florman, which she was a neighbor of Lady Lucan and formerly of Lord Lucan as well, told the police that around 10:30 someone was ringing her doorbell incessantly, over and over and over again. And she was home alone. She wasn't going to answer the door at 10:30.
No way.
So she waited till it stopped, and she kind of looked outside. She didn't see anyone, but shortly after this, she was like, okay, that was weird. And then her phone rang, and there was a man's voice on the phone, and it said, "Madeline, I know that you," and it kind of trailed off and kind of became inaudible like the rest of whatever he said. And so she just hung up because she was like, this is freaking me out.
Yeah.
But when she heard about the murders, she told police she believed that voice on the phone was Lord Lucan. I mean, she knew him. They had been neighbors. So investigators believe they know who they were looking for. And as they canvassed the area, they located Lucan's dark Mercedes 280 SE parked outside 72A Elizabeth Street, where Lord Lucan lived.
Mm-hmm.
That's the flat he lived in since he had moved out of his family's home. So, where was Lord Lucan?
Mm-hmm. Good question.
Well, when Veronica escaped from her home after he had attacked, he hastily fled as well. First, at around 10:45, he called his mother, Caitlin Lucan, from a phone box. English ones, you know? You know the ones. And he told her there had been a catastrophe at his wife's house. He said he saw a light on in the basement, and he'd interrupted an intruder attacking the nanny, and he asked her to go to his wife's house and get the children immediately because Veronica and the nanny had been very hurt. He also asked her to phone his friend Bill. I don't know why. Didn't say. Then about 11 p.m., a woman named Susan Maxwell Scott, who lived in Uckfield in Sussex, heard her doorbell ring. This is about 42 miles from where Lord Lucan lived.
Yeah.
And she's like, what the hey? It's 11 p.m. Who is this? She looked out the window and she saw Lord Lucan, her husband's gambling buddy.
Uh-oh.
So even though her husband was out of town, she was really surprised to see him, but she let him in. She's like, you look a fright. That's not a direct quote. I just feel like she would have said, you look a fright. He looked really disheveled. His pants were like wet. And she was like, what happened to you? So then he tells her the story, how he was walking past his house and he saw his wife being attacked in the basement by an intruder. See, now he saw his wife being attacked. He let himself in using the key and he ran down to the basement to try to save her. He startled the attacker. He slipped in blood and he realized his wife and the nanny were so injured. He continued that he went to Veronica's aid and tried to calm her down, but at that point, she accused him of hiring a hitman to kill her. So he was like, I'm going to get blamed for this. So he took off. That's his second story. So about 12:30 a.m., Lucan called his mother again to check in on the kids. She said, well, they are with me and they're fine. And the police are here with me too, and you should probably talk to them and give a statement. They're looking for you.
Yeah.
Caitlin said that her son sounded a little bit calmer than his first phone call to her. He said, I'll go to the police station in the morning. So she's like, okay. So he's still with his friend's wife at his friend's house. And he asked her for some paper and a pen. And he wrote 2 letters to his friend Bill Shandkid, that gambling buddy I told you he wanted his mother to call, and then it's the guy that introduced him to Veronica.
Okay.
So Veronica's brother-in-law.
Oh.
Which I mentioned at the very beginning, and I think it's been a long time since page 1.
I'm still I'm trying to focus.
So he wrote 2 letters to Bill, and he left the letters with Miss Maxwell Scott and asked her to post them for him. Around 1:15 a.m., Lord Lucan disappeared into the night.
Of course he did.
Miss Maxwell Scott couldn't be sure what kind of car he was driving, but she thought it was dark in color. That's really all she could come up with. The next morning, her daughter posted those letters for him, and she did not contact the police about Lord Lucan visiting her that night.
Yeah.
Strange.
Was remaining loyal for her husband.
Yeah, maybe. A few days later, at the New Haven, East Sussex cross-channel port, a blue Ford Corsair was found abandoned. There was blood all over the inside of the car. Even more interesting, do you know what they found in the boot, aka the trunk?
Gloves?
They found a piece of lead pipe wrapped in a bandage on the end.
Interesting. Not so smart.
Do you remember what was found at the crime scene, Lena?
The lead pipe.
That's right, the lead papped. Lead pipe wrapped in tape. They believed the car to be Lord Lucan's getaway car, and it was. He borrowed it from a friend named Michael Stoop. Michael Stoop lent it to him, no questions asked, and so they really found nothing in the car to give them any indication as to where he went. This is weird. Also, a few days after the murder, Mrs. Florman, the neighbor, noticed blood stains on her doorstep. I'm not sure if she hadn't left the house since the night of the murders,
Right.
or if she just noticed they were there and they had been there the whole time. But either way, she notified the police and they came to swap the blood.
Oh.
Hey, want to know what else they found in the car?
Yeah.
According to the Daily Mail, they found 3 Cluedo cards, which is the UK version of Clue, including Colonel Mustard and the lead pipe.
Okay, because on my notes right here that I'm writing down, I'm like, okay, Lord Lucan in the basement with the lead pipe.
Exactly. They were actually able to go to Lord Lucan's house, find his game of Cluedo, and the cards that were found in the car were cards missing from the game.
Wow. So he's just in this, and he's playing a game. That's what he's doing.
Yeah, exactly. So let's get into some more of the evidence that was found in association with the crimes. We'll start with the injuries. I mentioned Sandra had multiple blunt force injuries to her head.
Mm-hmm.
She had bruising on her shoulders, arms, and hands, consistent with defensive wounds. She also had bruising and cuts all over her, seemingly from a punch or a slap, so more of the fist.
Okay.
But the pipe was considered to be responsible for the blunt force injuries to her head. She had 5 lacerations
Bless her heart.
on her head, and some of them went as deep as her skull.
I'm sorry, Sandra.
So, Lady Lucan had blunt force injury to her head. She had cuts in her mouth from him putting his hand over her mouth or him sticking his fingers down her mouth. Now, the blood patterns at the scene confirmed Lady Lucan's account of the events. Back in the day, they obviously didn't have DNA, so they were only working with the blood typing. They had Sandra's blood determined to be type B, and Lady Lucan's blood was type A. So in the home, they found Sandra's blood in the kitchen, in the basement, also in the bathroom where Lord Lucan tried to clean up. And then a mixture of Lady Lucan's blood and Sandra's blood was found on the murder weapon, in the car, and on those 2 letters that he wrote to his friend. So he still had their blood on him when he fled to his friend's house.
Dude. And the wife did not call police.
No, she didn't. They also found hair in the abandoned Ford Corsair that was consistent with Veronica's hair. And the lead pipe found at the scene was a match for the section of lead pipe found in the car. They weren't adjacent pieces of pipe, but they were actually cut from the same piece of pipe.
Gotcha.
If that makes sense. So on January 26, 1975, so just months later, Miss Maxwell Scott contacted the Daily Mail to report that she had received a telegram from the post office, which said, "Tell Mother all went as planned. I am safe here. Love, John."
Okay.
Now, the Daily Mail published the article, including this information, and it was only then that police were notified. Again, Miss Maxwell Scott is the friend's wife that he went to see that night. And even after this telegram showed up months later, she still didn't go to the police. So, to your point, maybe she was trying to be loyal. Maybe she felt like she was protecting him in a way. But after months of investigation, they had no luck locating Lord Lucan. An inquest was held in 1975, and a jury convicted Lucan in absentia, finding him responsible for the murder of Sandra Rivet and the attack on Lady Lucan. The Metropolitan Police considered the case to be closed. They couldn't locate Lord Lucan, but they weren't going to just let this case, grow cold. So they wanted to go ahead and wrap things up there. Now, years and years passed. No sight of Lord Lucan. And his family were successful in having him declared legally dead in 1999 so that his will could be settled in probate court. Apparently, it's called like a grant of probate. They'll move the estate along, but a death certificate is not issued, which prohibits his heir from taking the hereditary title. So in the case of Lucan, no death certificate was issued at that time for the reasons I just mentioned. They had nothing to say that he was dead, so they weren't going to do that, but they were going to go ahead and let his family inherit his estate, I guess.
Wow.
But finally, in 2016, his son George Bingham, who was now 48 years old, and the only son of Lord Lucan, was granted a death certificate finally for his father. And he was able to assume the title of 8th Earl of Lucan.
Wow.
But he actually can't sit in the House of Lords. I know nothing about this stuff, but I'm just relying on the information from The Guardian. So, Justice Asplin's decision to grant a death certificate was actually made due to the circumstances that Lord Lucan hadn't been known to be alive for at least 7 years. But even though she granted a death certificate, it could be revoked if he reappeared.
Oh, okay.
If they found him, they could just, I guess, shred it. Just tear it up.
It never happened.
Throw it into the wind. I don't know. In September of 2017, Veronica didn't show up in Green Park, where she walked every day as a little old lady. So she was reported missing when attempts to reach her failed. Veronica was found dead in her home, and an autopsy revealed that she died of a lethal cocktail of drink and drugs.
Why?
Now, about 6 weeks before her death, she developed tremors in her hands. She felt like she was losing smell, and she started to believe that she was developing Parkinson's disease. This, coupled with her mental health issues, it seemed to have never been really treated properly, and she didn't want to live anymore. She had books on suicide in her home, and her friend recounted that they had discussed completing suicide if they had ever developed like a terminal illness. They just wouldn't want to go through that. So coroner Dr. Fiona Wilcox ruled Veronica's death a suicide. And she had been estranged from her children since the 1980s.
Really?
I don't know why. I couldn't really find any information about that, but isn't that really sad?
That is very sad.
Really sad. Now, the Daily Mail highlighted 4 main theories as to what might have happened to Lord Lucan. I'm going to run through these with you.
Let's hear it.
These are funny. Okay, theory number 1, Lucan drowned himself. In 2015, one of Lucan's gambling buddies, James Wilson, said he believed Lucan filled his pockets with stones and then jumped into the New Haven harbor the night of the killings. He thinks he was so overcome with remorse and guilt for killing the nanny instead of his wife that he just couldn't live with himself. And actually, a couple years later, an 80-year-old Veronica, aka Lady Lucan, gave a televised interview and spoke about her depression, her marriage to Lord Lucan, and the abuse she suffered at his hand. And she actually also said she believed that Lucan killed himself the night of the murders. She thinks he jumped off a cross-channel ferry to end his life so that nobody would be able to find his body and people would just wonder, like it was a game. Now, theory number 2, Lucan fled to Africa and died there in 2000.
Why 2000?
A woman named Shirley, I don't know. A woman named Shirley Robbie worked for one of Lucan's friends, John Aspinall. She said that in the 1980s, she overheard a conversation between her boss and another one of Lucan's friends, Sir James Goldsmith, and the pair were talking about how Lucan was hiding out in Africa at that time, and at that time, she had no idea there had been a murder. So she just thought they were talking about this guy named Lucan who was hiding in Africa. It really didn't make much sense to her at the time, so she didn't tell anybody that she heard that. She went on to say that she also heard that Lucan died in 2000 in his mid-60s. And she says that she wishes that she would have known about that sooner and she would have reported it to police.
Right.
Theory number 3. Lucan was shot and fed to a tiger at the
Oh
Kent
my.
Zoo.
Oh my. By who, pray
This
tell?
is a good one. Philippi, I think is pronounced Philip Mark, I don't know. Another one of Lucan's gambling buddies told the Mail Online that he and some other of Lucan's friends disposed of his body at Howlett Zoo near Canterbury, which was owned by John Aspinall. He said he was told by Stephen Raphael that the friends offered Lucan a gun. He went into a room, shot himself, and then they took his body and fed him to the tigers.
Okay. Is that because...
This is so crazy.
So that letter that they got saying all went well, like...
Right.
Hey, it all went well. I shot myself and now I'm fed to the lions or
and
tigers.
I'm now tiger bait. Well, the police actually did look into this claim, and the police did look into the other claims too, but they went to speak to John Aspinall because he owned the zoo, and John says, "My tigers are only fed the choicest cuts. Do you really think they would eat? Do you really think they're going to eat stringy old Lucky?" The answer is no. Theory 4. Lucan isn't responsible for the murders of the nanny, and his inner circle helped him escape.
Please.
So, Lucan's brother, Hugh Bingham, defended his innocence until his own death. Hugh said that he believed his brother's story of happening upon the attacks on the nanny and his wife, and that the police would surely blame it on him, so he went into hiding. So that's the 4 theories laid out by the Daily Mail, but they're missing an obvious one, and it's my theory. Theory number 5. Lucan did murder the nanny and attack his wife, and then he went into hiding.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the most obvious theory, right?
Yeah, I don't think he killed himself. He definitely went into
You don't
hiding.
believe he killed himself?
No.
Me either.
I mean, maybe he did go to Africa, and that's when he wrote a letter saying all went well. I'm, I'm where I said I was going to go. So, wow.
Well, authorities also believed Lucan was on the run and that he fled. They believed he could be in South Africa or Australia, mainly because there were reported sightings of him in those places. But there were also reported sightings of him in Ireland and New Zealand. And this one's funny too. One sighting claimed that he was living in India going by a man named Jungleberry. But it was just actually some guy named Jungleberry.
Interesting.
And authorities, they had limited resources in that day. So there was no social media, no internet, email, cell phones, or CCTV. And we talked about this kind of in the Winona Green case.
It's Winona.
Winona. She was tracked down pretty quickly, and I thought that was kind of remarkable at the time. But that's largely because she stayed local. I mean, she was walking along the train tracks in the town.
Yeah, exactly.
But if Lucan fled the country and perhaps ended up on the other side of the world, what are they going to do to find him in that day and age?
Yeah, he kept moving around and going from one place to the next. So, yeah.
Exactly. Well, perhaps they needed to wait till technology caught up.
Yeah.
In November of 2022.
Girl.
So just last November, a professor at the University of Bradford, Dr. Hassan Ugail, I think is how that's pronounced. He's a facial recognition expert. He was asked to look at some photos of a man who was living in Australia and who was believed by Sandra's son to be Lucan.
Wow.
And so he ran these photos along with photos of Lucan through an artificial intelligence software. Dr. Ugail said he is certain they are one and the same man.
Okay.
He said, "That isn't opinion, that's fact."
Really?
His report states the algorithm with the AI technology measures what's called a similarity index, And I don't know the actual measurement as far as like what it analyzes. Like, I didn't see the report as far as like, they can look at distances, bridge of the nose, eyes, things like that. So I don't know exactly what it was, but he said that any similarity index over 75% is considered to be a confirmation that they are either the same individual or an individual that looks exactly like them,
Wow.
like an identical twin.
A doppelganger.
Yeah. He said, in my experience, over the thousands of experiments we have done over many years involving millions and millions of faces, the face recognition algorithm would not report such close resemblance unless it is from the same individual or someone who looks extremely like them, such as their identical twin.
Oh, wow.
I know some identical twins.
Yeah, they're really cute.
Hey, I know some fraternal twins, too.
You do?
So, for the listeners, Lena is a fraternal twin.
Yes.
And I have identical twins. A lot of people ask me if twins run in the family, and I always hesitate because identical twins are not hereditary.
Right.
But I digress. Anyway, so Neil Berriman, who is Sandra's son, has a website called LordLucanTheTruth.com. And you can find it at I'm just kidding. That's the website. Now, it's riddled with rabbit holes I was not prepared for. It actually has a lot of great information that I used, like the police report and stuff like that. But he has the published report from Professor Ugale. So if you're interested in that, I think it's really cool. I'll link it in the show notes. But Professor Ugale's analysis concluded that this Australian man is Lord Lucan.
So, have they gone to find him?
They have.
Okay.
And George Bingham actually called him a couple of times and spoke with him for a moment and then got hung up on.
Ooh.
Yeah. On his website, he has a couple of audio clips of the phone calls.
Wow.
But when the then 87-year-old man was tracked down, he was being taken care of by a caregiver and denied that he was Lucan.
Well, of course. But can we do a DNA test?
Funny you say that. I'll get to that.
Okay.
Interesting thing, though, there was a warrant for his arrest. In the very beginning, of course. But when he was declared dead, in theory, the warrant should have been withdrawn. However, the warrant remained active because the solicitor refused to withdraw it.
Good.
Until his death was actually proven beyond a reasonable doubt.
Okay, smart person.
But a major challenge here was not just finding Lord Lucan, but if he could ever be found, proving it was actually him.
Right.
So they didn't have his fingerprints on file.
Oh.
And, because of, he was not a criminal. He had no criminal history. No DNA was collected.
Of course.
At the scene. So there was nothing, there wouldn't be anything to match.
Oh my gosh.
You could say that you could probably get DNA from his children, but I'm not sure of their willingness to do that. The reason I say that is because when George Bingham assumed the family title as the 8th Earl of Lucan, he gave a statement to the press outside the courthouse saying, "Our family has no idea how our own father, my father, met his own end, or whether he did so at his own hand or the hand of others on that fateful evening. It is a mystery, and it may well remain that way forever." He continued, "I would ask with a very quiet voice for everyone to consider a person did die here in a terrible circumstance, and a family also lost a father. As a British person, I still prefer to consider a person innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. To some extent, it has been a bit of a jaunt, and at other times been very difficult." So, with that being said, I don't think his son would be willing to give a DNA sample.
Yeah, to open up that whole wound.
Right. And I didn't read anything about the girls and what they're up to now or anything. So that just happened in November. So I'm going to keep an eye on it and see if anything comes of it. But he is old. If that is him, he's 87. He's being cared for. and he's
In Australia.
So, in Australia.
Wow.
But by now, he's probably relocated.
He's like, oh, I got to get
He's
out of
been
here.
found. I personally think he went on the run. I don't think he
Yeah.
killed himself. I think he thinks too much of himself
Absolutely.
to do that.
Yeah. I'm glad you
So-
agree with me because that's exactly how I feel.
Yeah, and the Cluedo cards. Come on, that's messed up.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's the story of Lord Lucan.
Wow.
The
Well,
crazy.
thank you. Thank you for the case suggestion, Uncle Ian. That was very
Yes.
interesting. And thank you for researching, Candace.
Yeah, that was a wild story. It was a
Yeah.
wild ride, I will tell you.
Well, that was great. Let's do it again sometime.
Yeah, let's do it. We'll see y'all next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, thank you for listening to Cousins on Crime. If you're enjoying our podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating so that other true crime fans can find us.
If you have any case suggestions or just want to say hey, email us at cousinsoncrime@gmail.com. And be sure to follow us on Instagram where we post case photos and information at Cousins on Crime Podcast.